Bulavinaka and good evening, Fiji. Welcome to the State of the Fijian, a show where we look at the state and the Fijian like you and I, and the politics that affects us all. A few weeks ago saw the end of COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. Fiji was represented by government officials and young activists who joined the negotiations talking about the effects of climate change in Fiji and the region. Joining me in studios today to talk more about climate change in oceans is climate change activist and the Pacific Island representative of the Sustainability Climate Alliance, Ms. KOMAL NARAYAN. KOMAL, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Abdul.
So you've been part of the youth activism journey on climate change for a long time. What was the motivation?
Well, I guess the whole motivation behind it is just basically coming from the Pacific, living in Fiji, having to see the realities of climate change, the frequency of cyclones that we're facing, what's just basically happening around us when we talk about climate change. I guess that was motivation enough, and then going to university, while you're studying, you're doing case studies, you learn more about what's happening in the region. So I felt that, you know, how do I as a individual fit into this, and what role can young people play, or what little can we do to sort of be part of the solution that we can offer when we talk about climate change. So yeah.
And while you were in university, because we went to university together, right? For
yeah.
a year at least. Did you see more young people being more keen about knowing this stuff? Because I remember the climate change assignment we had at the end of year one. Do you think there are more young people who are interested in youth activism? They're more worried about what's happening around them politically and socially?
Yeah, I guess from what you mentioned, when we were in the university and when we got that assignment on climate change, we actually had to, you know, running back home, going to the computer lab, doing all our Google searches. What really is it about? What is happening? What does the United Nations have to do in this role? What do we actually write up? So I feel that at that point it was a conversation that was, it was already there, but amongst the young people, it was something that was still emerging. It was still coming up. So, and now, like, you know, bringing in the present and looking back to it now, I feel that in that period of 10 years or something, we you know, that conversation amongst the young people has really taken a toll, and you see more and more young people, not just young people, but even children as well, knowing about what is climate change, what is happening around you. So I feel that that momentum has grown and is continuing to grow with time as more information becomes available.
Yeah, and why specifically climate change? Why not any other issue like maybe gender equality, or maybe I don't know, environment, or why not any other issue? Children's right, humans' right, democracy.
I always believed that, like, when I talk about climate change, it's sort of a cross-cutting issue in, you know, many of the areas that you've mentioned. So when we talk about climate change, you talk about human rights, gender equality, poverty, education, because without achieving all of this, you can't really have successful climate policies or climate change procedures, or sort of see an improvement in what's going around you. So I guess as I started, you know, taking an interest in climate change, as you start reading more about it, as you start actively participating in all this, you come to realize that climate change is a cross-cutting issue in all the areas, or rather all the SDGs that you talk about. So so it's sort of like an all-rounder, and there's so much. And climate change itself is such a broad topic that, especially when you read about it in the news, or for those who take a keen interest, and they probably, like you mentioned, had been following COP26. Right. There's so many different streams of climate change that you can follow: gender, human rights, mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage. So it's very broad, and it takes a bit of time for an individual to sort of find their niche and see exactly what field of climate change do I really want to, you know, be more active in, what do I really want to advocate about. So so that's the journey.
So how has the experience been? I feel like that climate change is one issue which is talked about in Fiji and globally in the region also, but it's one of the issues that is so important, but work on it is so slow. I feel like there's some sort of frustration. I don't work in climate change, but I feel that within the climate change activists. How has the experience been in the advocating and the awareness raising on climate change in Fiji and globally?
Okay, so I guess in Fiji and the region, I guess the experience would be quite positive because I guess, like I said, for small island developing states or for smaller Pacific Island nations like Fiji and our Pacific neighbors, we are actually feeling the brunt of climate change. We are seeing what's happening because of climate change with our very own eyes. Cyclones, natural disasters, sea level rising, it's happening right around us. So I guess it's much easier going out into the communities or doing grassroots community actions where you're able to talk to people about this is what climate change is, this is how it's impacting your livelihoods because I mean, you know, for leaders or internationally, there's a lot of conversations going on about climate change, and that's happening at a policy level. So it's very specific. They talk about policies and they talk about what the science is saying. This is how you know, we can minimize its impact maybe in the next 10, 20 years or so. But then, like here in Fiji, we are able to talk about it from the realities, the living realities of the people and how it's really impacting their livelihoods. So, so yeah.
Do people understand that we are not at fault of what is our reality? Do they understand that we can do so much, but we are emitting or we are contributing so little to this phenomenon?
To some extent, I do believe that because informally, I feel that climate change is something that's really talked about, especially after COP23 when Fiji took up the presidency and Fiji was leading the climate change negotiations for COP23 in Bonn. This whole level of conversation that started between the young and the old, and everyone just started talking about climate change. So now if you go out or if you're somewhere and every second person that you ask, do you know what climate change is? They'll be able to answer it. They'll be able to tell you that this is what climate change is, this is how it's impacting my country, my islands. So that level of understanding is there.
Okay, we're going to take a break here and we'll be back with more with KOMAL NARAYAN on the state of the Fijian. Welcome back to the state of the Fijian. We are talking climate change and oceans with KOMAL NARAYAN. KOMAL, just before we went on the break, we were talking about Fiji's COP23 presidency and how because of that presidency there has been more awareness and more dialogue and discussions in the community about the realities of climate change in Fiji. Intergenerational dialogue is one method that I know climate change activists and civil society is trying to bring young people and old people together. Let's have a conversation about that. How important is this intergenerational dialogue to the climate change movement?
I think this is something that should be an integral part of all these climate conversations we're having, because these intergenerational dialogues, it has that the power to bring together the young leaders, the leaders, the elders in the community, or sort of at a national level together at one place and talk about what's really happening. So it's a place, or it's sort of like a discussion where a young person is able to freely speak out their mind in terms of what they're feeling, what they're seeing in terms of climate change. What are their expectations from maybe CSOs, scientists, or maybe even the government? What do they really expect them to do? And sort of seeing things from a leadership or a government perspective as well, giving them an opportunity to explain about their policies. What policies are they talking about now? What is going to be implemented next? How does it actually benefit the community? How will it affect their livelihood? So it's sort of, I see it as a way of connecting, and I've noticed, or as when COP23 started, you know, this intergenerational dialogue sort of rather came in the form of Talanoa dialogues as well, you know, having informal conversations and being able to create a safe space. And we have seen that this really works out, because leaders and young people are able to sit around in a circle, and there's no status or sort of any hierarchy that's been created at that particular moment. So people are able to talk freely and have this safe space where they're able to really talk about what they feel, what changes they want to see, and hear from the leaders themselves as well. So
I do want to ask you something. It just popped in my head as we're talking about governments and communities and young people and people of different, you know, diversity, talking about what does it mean when you talk about mitigation and resilience in the context of climate change? I've heard this a lot, kind of work in that sector also, but understand it, but can't really explain it maybe.
Well, I'm no expert, or I don't really have a scientific background to be really able to talk about it, but what makes it easy for me to understand resilience and mitigation is looking at it from our Pacific perspective in terms of seeing how the livelihoods of the people are being affected. I know I talk a lot about the livelihoods of the people, but then this is what climate change is all about. It's making us see the living realities of the people themselves, how they're being affected. So every time there's a new policy that's being announced or a new policy that's being talked about, it needs to ensure when it's being implemented, how resilient are the lives of the people sort of, becoming. Like, for example, if you look at the planned relocation guidelines of Fiji, it talks about relocation or the movement of people from one place to another, or those whose households are being displaced because of rising sea levels. So if you look at this particular policy, you automatically think about, if we implement this policy and we're relocating one community to the other, are their livelihoods or their households becoming more resilient now, or these changes that will happen after the movement, are these sort of more towards a positive context, or will it make their living standards more worse or more good? So sort of seeing it from that, logical perspective. So you don't really have to think of a scientific explanation or a big definition into defining what resilience is. And I guess for mitigation, mostly when we talk about the greenhouse gas emissions, or like for us here in the Pacific, we contribute the very least amount. Our carbon emissions are just below 0.03% of what's being produced at the moment. So coming up with some strategies, we call it mitigation strategies, on how we can curb or reduce these emissions, and what can actually be done about it from a policy perspective or individual perspective.
That brings me to the nationally determined contributions, and I wanted to ask about what is the NDCs, and I understand there has been some announcements around NDCs at COP26.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I guess in the context of NDCs, just a very basic definition would be that it's sort of like a informal commitment towards, a country's commitment towards taking climate action. So this is a plan where they talk about their different strategies, or how do they really want, or what maybe policies or activities do they really want to implement, so that you are able to see a reduction in your greenhouse gases over a period of time. And I guess when we talk about COP26, you hear a lot of people say that it was very disappointing. It wasn't what they expected. But I think in the context of NDCs, I feel that it was slightly a bit more positive in terms of the outcomes that came out, because most of the countries, and also Fiji was one of the few countries who were able to successfully submit their NDCs in 2020. So now the countries that gathered at COP26, now they have another opportunity where they're able to revise their NDCs and submit it in 2022 again. So it now gives them a chance to relook at what has been mentioned in their NDCs, what changes they can further make. Like, for example, there was a discussion that was going on around how many of the country's NDCs has climate education mentioned in it, but it came out that not really a lot of countries' NDCs have that. Bigger countries, developed countries, they barely talk about climate education, or they don't have climate education mentioned in their NDCs, whereas small island developing states, or even Fiji, for example, in our NDCs, we have climate education mentioned. We talk about gender, we talk about doing things from a human rights-based perspective. So, this particular, I guess this window, 2022, gives those bigger countries or the developed countries an opportunity to come up with more strategies on how they would be able to reduce their greenhouse gases.
Because there's been conversation about bigger countries with their NDCs not being really ambitious with their targets towards having climate actions. And this could be an opportunity for bigger countries, and there's been so much lobbying by our government officials and young people from the region who have been present there. We're going to go for a break. We're going to come back and talk more on climate change. You are watching The State of the Fijian. See you in a while. Welcome back. We are talking to KOMAL NARAYAN about climate change and the oceans. And we just finished talking about Fiji's nationally determined contributions. KOMAL, you're part of something called the Sustainable Oceans Alliance. You're the Pacific Island rep. What is that about?
Yeah, well, the Sustainable Ocean Alliance was actually founded in around 2014 in US actually, and since then it has grown so big that its presence is now in over 160 countries, and we have these Sustainable Ocean Alliance hubs in most of the regions, and that's how it started off in the Pacific. We had some discussions during COP25 that there was an interest to set up a hub that's for young ocean leaders or youths who are interested to or want to focus more on ocean health and sustainability. So we started it in January last year, and this is where we are right now. So we're trying to, well, of course, most of our work was affected by COVID, but now we're trying to get back on track and create, workshops, awareness sessions, webinars, just specifically focusing around ocean health and sustainability, so that the youths from the Pacific, they have opportunities to access maybe small scale fundings. If they're working on a project and they require mentorship, we can link them up with scientists or experts or any resources that's available from within the Sustainable Ocean Alliance headquarters, and get them forward, get them motivated, so they are able to sort of rise in this area and be able to achieve their what they really want to do in this area of ocean health and sustainability.
Yeah, a question I wanted to ask with regards to ocean that came up as a point of discussion last night while I was preparing for this show was how important is the discussion on oceans for people of the Pacific?
This is something that's really, really important because for us here in the Pacific, looking at our geographical location, our ocean area is so vast that it's basically a sense of identity for our people. It's a source of livelihood for many of the coastal communities. It's basically, for most of the coastal communities, this is basically where they were born, where they grow old, where they really, they really want to be. So it's a source of livelihood for them. It's a way of their lifestyle. It just becomes a part of our identity so much that it's really hard to take it out from sort of becomes an identity, right?
Yep.
So.
And in the same vein, how important is it to have that conversation of climate change and ocean at the same time?
I think, well, every time we talk about oceans, climate change is a part of it, because when we talk about oceans, we talk about, for example, coral restoration or bleaching events, sea level rising, and all these events are always aggravated by climate change. So these are always connected.
Yeah, and I also wanted to ask about, I think I saw a government official post about something around Friends of the Ocean and oceans being included in the UN FCCC agenda. What is that about?
Yeah, so Friends of the Ocean is basically a informal leaders network consisting of government reps, CSOs, and NGOs rather, who are trying to fast track the whole progress and conversation around oceans. And the Honorable Peter Thompson, the UN Oceans Envoy, is a part of it as well.
He's a Fijian, right? He was a former UNJ president and Fiji's ambassador to the UN.
Exactly.
Right.
So he's been championing that, and I think another successful outcome for COP26 itself was the adoption of the oceans language into the UNFCCC agenda, and now it's in process where conversations or agenda around climate change and oceans will be included in the UNFCCC agenda, because before this was something that was always talked about, contextualized, but it never really happened. But this year, the Fijian government really made the effort. They really put up that fight, that conversation, making sure that oceans really got adopted into the UNFCCC agenda. So that's where it stands now. And now every time COP happens, like we talk about adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, oceans will also be a part of that conversation.
Right. Okay, so we're just going to move on to the final part of this segment, which is we talk to a group of young people and tell them, okay, this is what the episode is about. What question do you have for our guest? And I'm going to play one audio that has been sent to us.
Sure.
With regards to climate change, Fiji took the lead in banning the use of plastic bags because of its harmful effects on the environment, particularly the marine ecosystem. Has there been any form of assessment to see how has the ban been successful, or has there been any feedback from fishermen or local communities regarding an increase in fish?
So what the question is about is, we have recently, Fiji has banned plastic, Fiji has banned styrofoam usage, and we know that there are positive impacts of this. So what the question is asking is, has there been some sort of survey or some sort of data collection which is showing benefits to the ocean because of these bans?
So I guess from coming from that perspective, it would be the role of the government, because they implemented this particular policy, the ban of plastic bags. So it comes under their jurisdiction to conduct surveys or measure progress. But I guess just from observation, just right now, every time you look around you and you see rubbish lying around, or you see plastics in the ocean when you go to the beach side. So it's not something that's there because people just threw it yesterday. It accumulates over time, and it would have probably been lying around for the past 20 years, 50 years, or 100 years, but it's coming up now and people are seeing it. So whatever action that is being taken right now, it's going to take a bit of a time for us to really see the impacts of it. And I guess just generally from observation, you can see that young people are really taking an interest and switching to other non-plastic alternatives. So you can see that it's becoming effective, but the actual disposal of plastic products near the maybe beachfronts, near the roadside, in the ocean, it's going to probably take a few years to be actually able to see the real difference.
Okay, we've got another question from Tiare. I'm going to play it for you now.
Bula Vinaka, my name is Tiare, and I would like to raise a question based on youth activism. And I know that youth activism is basically the participation in communities organized by young people for social change, such as climate change and other issues. So my question to KOMAL is, what are the ways that young people can take effective action for change in the community? Thank you.
So how can young people take actions that are effective in the community? A quick response.
Yeah, I guess I would say that no action is too big or too small. Just making a simple switch, maybe saying no to plastic straws and switching to metal straws, saying no to plastic bags, and using reusable bags or bamboo products. I think it's this simple switch that that sort of shows your passion and how passionate you are about the individual actions. And it's also about the mindset as well. So if you learn something new about the environment and you are practicing something, there's no harm in sharing it with your friend or your peers and seeing if they're also motivated enough to do the same.
Well, thank you so much, KOMAL, especially in terms of oceans, which I had very less knowledge about. Learned so much. Thank you for coming to the show, and it has been an interesting conversation. That was KOMAL NARAYAN talking to us about climate change and the ocean. Till then, good night.